This lecture is based on using electronic platforms and other technology in health education. By the end of the session, you will be able to identify how to successfully use electronic platforms in health education and develop a list of at least 5 ways you could implement the use of electronic communications in your role as a health educator. The first thing to discuss is the difference between immigrants and natives, and these are technology immigrants and natives. Natives are born with computers, and those are what most of you are. Most of you are young enough to have been born with computers. Because you've had computers your whole life, you are innately knowledgeable about electronic communications. You have an ability to work with technology that older people or immigrants do not. Technological immigrants had computers introduced sometime in their lives, and I always share this example when I talk about immigrants. When I was in college for my bachelor's degree, we did not even have word processors. Everything was typed on a typewriter, and you were only allowed 1 to 3 errors per page. So if you had more than that on a page, you had to retype that entire page. When I went to graduate school, I paid someone who had a word processor $1 a page to type my thesis. My first computer cost $1,600, and it had 4 megabytes of memory and 8 megabytes of RAM. And at that point in time, everybody thought that we would never need more than 4 megabytes of memory on a computer. And realize I'm saying megabytes and not gigabytes. People that are immigrants like myself, we have had to learn how to use electronic communication, and we have had to learn how to use technology in order to stay competent in our fields. So while people your age are natives, you were born with computers, people my age were not born with computers. And so there's a difference when you talk about immigrants and natives in this field. My son had a computer in the house from the time he was born, although one of them only had 4 megabytes of memory. However, by the time he was 7, he had his own computer because he kept crashing my computer. So most of you probably had computers when you were very young, whereas someone who's an immigrant like myself may not have had a computer until I was in my mid-30s or early 30s. So there's a huge difference in the way people interact with technology if they're native or if they're immigrant. There's a lot of people who say that electronic communication is not an appropriate use to communicate or an appropriate use to educate, and there's lots of reasons. And people who are against electronic communication and new modes of technology often state the following barriers. They might say, it just doesn't work for me. It doesn't really fit for my programming. It's too impersonal. I need to have hands-on experiences with my students. People learn better face-to-face, and people need to learn to communicate better so that they can only do that in face-to-face education or communication. Although people have lots of barriers to using electronic communications, there's a lot of benefits to using electronic communications. The first one is that when you use anything electronic, everything is documented. It's very rare that you absolutely lose everything that you've done. Often it's saved somewhere in a server that can be withdrawn from that server and used as a documentation. Documentation is very good, but it also makes you have to be very careful about what you put in writing. The next reason why it's important to use electronic communications is that at this point in time, most workplaces require the use of technology. And by using technology with your clients or your patients, you're actually helping them learn a skill that will be important to helping them be successful at work. Another reason to use electronic communications in health education is that everyone learns differently. And while some people might really need a face-to-face class, there are a lot of people who do better with electronic communications or online technology type classes. It's also a far better way to use limited classroom space. If you're working in a nonprofit organization or almost any organization, there's very limited amount of space. So anything you can do online would help save space for when you have a need for actual face-to-face meetings or education. A lot of people feel it's a waste of time to come to a meeting that can be held online. And so in my last job, my executive dean was in his late 60s. Actually, he was 71, I think, when I left. And when we would have an online conference call with another college, in-state or out of state, he often wanted us all in the same room. So he totally did not get the purpose of online meetings, because for us, we were all over the county. So I would drive often 45 minutes to a meeting, have a 45-minute meeting, and then drive 45 minutes back to my office. So for an hour and a half, I had lost work time. And a lot of businesses are starting to realize that that is critical time where you could be creating documents or working or producing something that you cannot produce if you're driving to a meeting or from a meeting. And for all of those reasons, it saves a lot of money. Businesses have to reimburse you for gas mileage, and they also are losing work time. They're losing an hour and a half of your work time if you drive to and from a meeting for 45 minutes each way. So these are all just very reasonable items as to why people would use electronic communications. So what are some common electronic communications? One is work-based learning, and work-based learning is part of an educational experience, and most of you are going to do this somewhat in your internships. In work-based learning, what you're doing is you're learning as you work, and then you actually document what you're learning, or you answer certain questions weekly, and you submit those electronically. In reality, there's a lot of times that you'll be working with clients that you could open a blog or a discussion board where they could talk to each other about the situation, about whatever they're experiencing. In your internships, you could actually meet with each other occasionally online to discuss your experiences, or you could blog about your experiences. Electronic health records have been implemented across the United States to varying degrees, and with electronic health records comes a lot of benefits. In electronic health records, if you need to see a specialist, your doctor can send all of your records to the specialist with a push of a button, and they're there automatically. The insurance companies get your records immediately for payment of services. Your prescriptions can be done electronically. And this is not going away. Electronic health records, they're here to stay. So any of you who are going into a healthcare setting, you're going to have to understand electronic communication, because you may actually have to document something in someone's electronic health record. Another aspect of electronic communications are platforms like Facebook. And Facebook is used primarily as a social media tool. However, some people use it in an educational setting. I'm going to give you an example of one teacher of whom I know, and in high school or middle school who actually uses Facebook, and what she has done is she's created a Facebook page to match a novel. And throughout the reading of the novel in English class, the students must post items or answers to questions as if they are a character in the book. And so each person in the classroom is assigned a character in the book. And then as the discussions continue, they actually discuss the questions online as if they were that character, which has increased participation because younger people like using electronic communications. So that's one way, and there are many, many more that you could utilize Facebook as a way to communicate. In this class, and I don't think this is in the slide presentation, I asked you to set up a LinkedIn page because LinkedIn is also a form of social media, but it's media trying to attach you to other professionals who are similar to you. Facebook is much more user-friendly than LinkedIn, but very few people use Facebook in any kind of professional aspect. LinkedIn right now is the only format that we have to use for that. I take that back. There are some others, but there are no others that are free. Twitter accounts. A lot of people your age use Twitter accounts more than they use Facebook now. And Twitter accounts are also used by educators in tweeting out assignments. And I do believe tweeting is the correct form of the verb. So there are teachers who actually tweet the homework assignments to students. And what's been found is people who use Twitter, the educators who use Twitter, actually have a higher rate of homework completion. There are a lot of ways that you can use Twitter or email accounts to broadcast information that you need to have known. There are the vaccination format. There's a vaccination document that actually is either put out on Twitter or through email, where you actually can remind people that they need a vaccination update. You can use that for a variety of issues related to electronic healthcare records. You can align your electronic healthcare records with a Twitter or email account that automatically sends reminders to patients or clients. Another item that I forgot to mention about Facebook is many communities have Facebook pages where people, there's usually two types of Facebook pages. For example, in my neighborhood, there's the official Facebook page for my neighborhood where the neighborhood association posts important documents and minutes to the meetings and the budget reports. But then there's also a Facebook page where the people in the neighborhood communicate with each other about different items. Lost animals, anybody want to buy this thing I'm selling? There's a issue with receiving permits to build decks, but there's a place where people can actually communicate with each other. And so those are also things to remember as you move forward, because you could actually use them in health education. There's also online learning platforms, and the one that we use at this university is Blackboard. Just like there's lots of reasons to use online communications for meetings, there's also a lot of reasons to use online learning in an educational setting. There are many things that you can do online, like this lecture, for which you do not need to be in a classroom. So more and more people are using online platforms to educate. These are some other forms of electronic media or electronic communications that you can use. And for example, what we're using right now, Panopto, is a format to use. So you have to start to think about what you can use. And in the bottom right-hand corner is the infinity mark, and that is there because this will go on for infinity. Every year there will be new products that you can actually select to use to work with your clients or patients or peers. So at this point in time, I'd like you to pause for a little bit and think about how you could use electronic communications in your internship or your career. So take a minute or two to jot down some ideas of what you could do to use electronic communications in your field of study, in your internship, or your possible career. Okay, I'd like you to look at that list. You're going to need to have a list of things like that, perhaps on an upcoming exam, that you could actually identify some ways that you could use electronic communications in the real world. At the beginning of the session, I told you that you would be able to identify how to successfully use electronic platforms in health education and develop a list of at least 5 ways you could implement the use of electronic communications in your role as a health educator. As you reflect back on this lecture, you should have been able to develop those 2 skills or knowledge base. And this concludes the lecture on technology in health education.